My project is on the elemental properties of Scotch broom-derived biochar. So starting off with what is biochar? Biochar is basically just a carbon-like, a charcoal-like, very carbon-rich substance made from a wide variety of organic matter. That can include like plants, plant waste, or manure. So anything you can think of that's organic, you can pretty much turn into biochar. And the properties of biochar vary depending on the feedstock that you make it from and the production methods. So, like temperature can play a big role in what the final result of the biochar is like in terms of like carbon and nitrogen and pH and stuff like that. And so, Scotch broom is an invasive plant species that's found globally. It's on every continent except Antarctica, and it damages the soil for native plants, and removing it can actually increase that damage. And it's also widely considered a fire hazard. And so turning it into Scotch broom biochar is a potential solution to mitigating the waste problem. And so some historical context for biochar, there's been evidence of its use dating back to 5000 BCE in the Amazon rainforest, which is kind of an example here. For this picture, you have the normal Amazon soil that's very lightly colored, and it's not as good at nutritious for plants. But then you have this very dark, almost black soil that's very nutritious and for plants. And then it's also been used by modern indigenous people in sub-Saharan Africa that often combine it with like eggshells to improve its nutritional properties as well. And the interest in biochar is fairly new to scientific literature, with it really taking off at around 2010. Before then, there was only a couple hundred papers, but then after that, in like 2020, there was about like 10,000 papers written on it at that point. And a lot of this growing interest is due to the potential for biochar's environmental and economic benefits. And that kind of leads us into why does it matter? So currently a lot of unwanted organic waste, which Scotch broom often is just taking up space, it's costing people money, and it's creating like fire hazards. And so oftentimes it's just put into a big pile and burned, and that releases uh, greenhouse gases and air pollutants and can damage the soil underneath. And so instead of doing that, you can turn that waste into biochar to create potential economic opportunities from that previous waste. And then you can use that biochar to potentially restore or improve soils or sequester carbon, remove pollutants from water, or as an electrode material. And the carbon sequestration is particularly noteworthy for like farmers because you can take the farm waste, turn it into biochar, and then potentially put it in the ground and sequester that carbon and maybe get some carbon credits for it and turn farmland that's normally a net producer of carbon into a carbon sink potentially. And the uh, and temperature is a very major factor in how the biochar can be used afterwards because it changes its properties. And that's what my research mostly focused on is there a relationship between pyrolysis temperature and the elemental properties of Scotch broom-derived biochar? And so I basically measured the percent carbon, nitrogen, pH, and conductivity and weight of the Scotch broom-derived biochar at three different temperatures. Carbon's important because it's important for soil health and can be, like previously stated, you can store it in the soil. Nitrogen is important for plant growth as well. pH is important for soil health and plant growth because if you have too acidic soil or too basic of soil, it can kill the plant. And conductivity just basically measures dissolved salts, which is important for salt-sensitive plants and nutrients transfer for like microbes in the soil to make sure the plant actually can get those nutrients. And there's been growing interest in how to maximize some of these properties. And so far, there's only been really one peer-reviewed paper on Scotch broom-derived biochar. There has been smaller studies where it's like maybe an offshoot, but it's not peer-reviewed, and it's very small subsection of some of those papers. And so for my methods, I received some ground-up Scotch broom from Desiree Wittenberg. and I then placed the Scotch broom in crucibles and wrapped them in foil. I then tested them at three different temperatures, 400, 500, and 600 degrees Celsius in the muffle furnace. And I had 20 samples for each temperature, which was 60 total. And then I sieved that and stored it in a desiccator to prevent water from being absorbed into those samples. Then I used the elemental analyzer to determine the carbon and nitrogen percentages of that biochar. And for the pH and conductivity, I mixed it with water for an hour and then used some pH and conductivity probes. And then for my statistical analysis, I used JUMP to perform an ANOVA and Welch's ANOVA. And I performed the normality and equal variance tests as well, but it failed the normality and test. But given the large number of samples, Aaron and I determined it was okay to proceed with the ANOVA because I had so many samples. And it also wasn't great for it failed the equal variance test as well. But given the large sample size, we decided to proceed as well, as long as it didn't proceed over tenfold variance. And for that, I used the Welch's instead because it's more robust to changes in variance. So my results for carbon were that it increased pyrolysis temperature. Increasing the pyrolysis temperature increased the percentage of carbon in the biochar. And so this graph basically just shows at the top you have like ABC that's just showing that there's statistical difference between each of those temperatures. And then the dots, like the black dots, are outliers. And I'm suspecting that's largely because of them only reaching partial pyrolysis. And so they show up as outliers. And then the red dot is just where the untreated Scotch broom would be. And the table is the post hoc test, just to show the actual p-values for each of those comparisons. And the untreated Scotch broom was at 48.5%, and then it jumped up by 20% for the once you turn it into biochar, and then it jumped even further to 77.6% at higher temperatures. So the main takeaway is that pyrolysis increased the percent carbon of untreated Scotch broom by about 20% and raised the pyrolysis temperature increased percent carbon by another 9%. For nitrogen, there was a pyrolysis increased the percent nitrogen relative to the untreated Scotch broom by about 1%, and 500 was statistically different from 400 and 600 degrees Celsius, but it only changed it by about 0.2%. And so pyrolysis increased percent nitrogen from untreated Scotch broom, but increased temperatures had a small effect after that. For pH, temperature did affect the pH of the biochar, with pH increasing as pyrolysis temperature increasing as well. And the original untreated Scotch broom was at 5.5%, with it jumping all the way up to 8.2%. I mean, 8.2, not percentage. And at 400, and then it jumped even further up to 10 at 600. And each of these results were statistically different from each other. And this showed that the Scotch broom-derived biochar is very high in pH and could potentially be used to improve acidic soils, which is especially noteworthy because in a lot of farmland, they use mineralized fertilizers that can lead to soil acidification. And by using biochar, you could potentially bring those soils back up to a higher pH. For conductivity, increasing the pyrolysis temperature increased the electrical conductivity, and there was statistical difference between each temperature. Interestingly, the conductivity actually dropped from the untreated Scotch broom to 400 before being rising again from there. And so relative to untreated Scotch brooms, pyrolysis temperature had a variable effect on conductivity. For weight, there was statistical difference between 400 and 500 and 600, but not between 500 and 600. Going from untreated Scotch broom to biochar, you lost about half of your weight at 400. And then going from 400 to 500, you lose about another 40%. But then going from 500 to 600, you lose about 12% of that biochar. And then, so the main takeaway is that increasing pyrolysis temperature resulted in less biochar with a substantial loss between 400 and 500 degrees Celsius. For the discussion, varying the pyrolysis temperature can change the percent carbon and nitrogen, pH, electrical conductivity, and the amount of biochar produced, and you can potentially use that for improving soil conditions. And producers can change their production temperatures to create biochar with their desired effects. For example, if you want high pH, make it at a higher temperature. If you want lower pH, make it at a lower temperature. And the Scotch broom-derived biochar has a high carbon content and pH, making them potentially useful for carbon sequestration and as a soil additive. My results showed a 9% higher carbon percentage than the previous study at the same temperature, which was at 600 for theirs. And so I had higher carbon percentage by about 9%, probably because I had a higher heating rate. And in conclusion, Scotch broom is a viable feedstock for biochar with high carbon content and high pH values. And Scotch broom removal harms soil, and adding Scotch broom derived biochar to that soil may help heal the damaged soil, but further study would be needed to actually determine this, and I think further study would be worthwhile for that. And my acknowledgements, and my we're excited, my bibliography.